Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Mastering Dungeons. I'm Shawn Merwin here with the happy as always Teos Abadia. Hey Teos, how's it going?
I am happy it's called sleep deprivation because my work keeps giving me these like 5 a.m. calls, and then I've got a Kickstarter that's launching. And so between those two forces, it is just there's only one way, and it's the happy way.
Well, yeah, I felt so bad because I tried to access our podcast email this morning and it did the double authentication thing which goes to your phone. And I went, "Oh no, I fear I woke Teos up. Oh, I
Oh,
hope he could sleep through that." And then I look and I see you messaging me back. I'm like, "Oh, it's 5 a.m. where Teos is. He's awake. That's probably not a good sign."
yeah. I was talking shipping labels, as one does.
Sweet. Sweet. Well, rather than talking shipping labels, I think we should talk about D&D and role-playing games today. What do you say?
I am a big fan of that. Let's do it.
So, we're going to do our news and commentary section, and for our main topic, we are going to bring in James Introcaso and Rudy Basso to talk about their book, a 5e and Zweihander adventure called To Be or Not to Be a Villain, which is a game product based on Hamlet. And you will hear all about that when we talk to Rudy and James in our next segment.
I
But right
love
now,
me some daddy
yeah,
shakes.
exactly. The bard, as they say, the original bard. Apparently,
Original
I don't
part.
know if he could, give inspiration to people, but apparently
Hmm.
he's been doing so for a few hundred years. Well, we have D&D news first. We're going to start with the one D&D playtest. We'll first talk about what they said, they being Jeremy Crawford in particular, about the feedback they've gotten so far, and then we'll dig into the latest Unearthed Arcana playtest packet. So, what does Jeremy have to say about the future of one D&D playtesting? I will let Teos fill you in.
Yeah, so this was a different kind of video if you watch the previous summary video. This one on the 1D&D cleric I thought was a little more grounded. Maybe they've heard some of the feedback about how last time was sort of so glowing they had to go really. This they did share that the Goliath was popular with its new emphasis on giant themes. And the revised Dragonborn is now well received. So these both had scores that were in the 80s for Jeremy. But then they went on to say that the Ardling did not score well and, quote, its time has not yet come. So maybe we'll see the beast like Ardling in some future product. But one of the things they said is that it felt like it didn't have a story connection, which I agree with. Seems weird as a sort of starting creature rather than a story centered creature. So it may be that we see it in some particular product rather than in being in the core rules.
Yeah, it's funny because the surveys, for me, surveys are only as useful as the people who take them. So, do we know who is taking the survey? Is it just the experienced player who only cares, not only cares, but is so steeped in the history of D&D that to see an Ardling, they're just like, well, the Ardling's not my D&D character, so therefore I don't want to see an Ardling.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah, if we had a survey of only players of a certain age and under, or of a certain right who came to the survey in a different way, maybe they would love the Ardlings, and
Right.
they would say the Goliaths are something else. So,
Yeah.
it's odd for me to see the results being well. You know how surveys are, right? If you show someone the results of a survey, the first thing they're going to do is critique the survey.
Sure.
And I don't care who you are. I don't care if you make surveys for a living and are the master of survey creation. Someone's going to say, "Oh,
Yeah.
your data's flawed because your survey's flawed."
Yes, though I think that on top of that, when I look at these surveys, and I've only taken, a course or two in survey design. My wife has taken a lot more, so I rely on her knowledge. But when I look at these surveys and when I share them with her, often I say, well, that doesn't you're not asking the question that gives you the answer you're looking for. And so there is an art and a science to survey
Mhm.
design. And I thought it was very interesting in this video. They shared that they are looking at the comments, and I think they said this somewhat to sort of prove like, hey, we really are reading the comments. But
Mhm.
their comment was, something might be rated 5 stars, but when you read the comments are all very ho hum. And
Right.
so then we realize there's work to be done, and I'm glad that they're looking at that and comparing it. But I go back to, well, you may not be writing asking the right questions,
Mm.
because people are
Right.
rating something 5 stars, but because they don't understand what you're really asking, and that is the real crux of survey design, is to make sure that you are not driving a particular result or
Mhm.
hiding an emotional response, that kind of, you're trying to get the accuracy of it out. And so I think
Right.
there's work to be done there. I keep saying I would love if they were to hire an actual survey design company and work with them on these,
Mhm.
to be better. The other thing is, I think that with D&D Next was really good at getting people from lots of different places, because you had things like store programs like D&D Encounters switching to D&D Next, so that all those people, whether they followed D&D news or were on the
Mhm.
internet or whatever, they're like, "Oh, there's a play test. Oh, I can be a part of it. I will go find that survey," right? There's
Yeah.
nothing like that. This is only being broadcast to the people who are part of the community. And that is a
Right.
really small group with a particular style of play, or at least a
Yeah.
more focused. And that's a hard thing when you're not able to get to the larger reality.
Yeah, and I think it's even harder with something like this, like a role-playing game design, when there are so many different aspects to a role-playing game and how you interact with a role-playing game, that you could say, how did you like this? And does like mean, do I like the story behind it? Do I like the way the mechanics work with the game as I understand it? Do I like this type of character, so therefore I will like it? Right? There's so
Yeah.
much to make. I feel like to make a true survey, to get the answers that you might need, you're going to be making surveys that go on for 2 hours. Uh, and which your point is exactly it, right, too. It's who is taking this, who has the link to it. It's the most invested players coming to the websites.
And there was an interesting example of this when discussing this sort of difference between the ratings and the comments. They particularly mentioned the jump action, and that the
Mhm.
feedback was not very positive in the comment section, even though the score was fine. So the jump action is currently out, right? It is gone from
Right.
the glossary. To which I say, you didn't really ask questions though. So like, how do you really, like, it's
Right.
only the comments now that you can rely upon, because you never really asked a detailed question about this. And so I worry that this, it's really hard to get data from there. So we'll see.
Right.
Hopefully, over time, this kind of keeps improving. Um, on the cleric, which was the one of the biggest parts of this, they said that there was a lot of positivity around features such as the holy order concept, but there's a lot of work the team will need to do to keep drilling and make sure the revision sings for people who like clerics. And I thought that was a little interesting, the angle of sort of like writing for people who like a thing is an interesting angle. I don't know whether that's good or bad, but that idea of sort of, like,
Yeah.
I'm writing a fighter for a person who likes fighters. But I don't, is that good? Maybe. I don't know.
Right. And that's why this whole idea of the survey, I'm fine with it in terms of asking people what they like, because people will like different things, and there doesn't have to be a lot of reasoning behind what you like. You just like it. When you're building a role-playing game, you're building a machine that needs to work in a certain way to get the results that you are expecting from that machine. And when you start to sort of group think this machine that needs to work with a little bit of precision, at least, you're asking for trouble by trying to build something to please everyone.
Yeah.
And in the long run, all you're doing is either adding things to the machine that make the machine run more inefficiently,
Yeah.
or you're breaking the machine and it's not going to work at all.
Yeah, and one last thing on the general level, they talked about the 2023 UA schedule and said it's going to be every few months, right? So I think the original concept was sort of like, oh, we're going to have a playtest every month, and then that sort of wasn't being hit. And so they've now released one, and then there's going to be another one in April, and then it'll be, so maybe every other month. They are also saying people are asking for more time in between releases and bigger releases. To which I say, where did you ask this question? you know,
Mhm.
is it just the people who thought to say this? Like, that's if this is gonna if you want feedback, that should have been a survey question. I don't,
Right.
otherwise it's not. I mean, it may not be science anyway, but it's certainly not science if just random people thought to say this, because that's going to be people who are complaining rather than any way of
Right.
measuring it. So, but or maybe it's just Jeremy explaining this is what we're going to do and saying it in a nice way. But
Right.
okay, so
I think yeah, I
yeah.
think it's not a coincidence that the thing people were asking for is
Mm,
the thing that probably works best for Wizards of the Coast in
yeah.
terms of getting this out in a way that you can say you play tested while still meeting a 2024 schedule.
Yeah. And I think it is neat that they're saying that future videos will come out that will be sort of masterclass videos and evergreen design videos. So the idea of sharing more of how they're approaching things, I think that's good, especially if they can help everybody understand, the challenge of these things rather than sort of making it too marketing focused. That could be really useful and attract a lot of people to sort of look at how they approach the design. Could be cool.
Mhm. I totally agree there. And so that video aside, we got a new Unearthed Arcana playtest packet, including the Druid and the Paladin. And so is it just me as a DM, and game designer and person who loves to mess around with rules? Does all this stuff and even stuff we're seeing of the 5e compatible, other games that are coming out are just sort of moving pieces around on the same board?
I mean, and sometimes that's a little desirable, right? Because you're trying to sort of stay within the concepts of the RPG. You want it to feel like a cohesive edition, so therefore it's, you're moving units around. We see that with proficiency bonus, right? Where it was like so overused because it sort of became like the way to do it. And now they're taking a look at it and saying, well, maybe we'll back off of proficiency bonus in some cases because we're realizing it isn't the right tool for every job. Um,
Mhm.
I liked the druid. I'm going to go ahead and say it. So let's talk about what it is and the reaction so far, which a lot of it I at
So
least
you were the one.
I'm the guy, yeah. And I'll tell you
Okay.
why. I'll defend myself to the end of days. Though I'm very biased, I'll be right up front because this is honestly sort of this is the basis of what I've actually always wanted for the druid in 5e, going back to the D&D Next playtest. But what they've done is they've basically said that wild shape, they've sort of renamed it a bit so that it's channel nature, and this makes it something that you could use in various ways over time. Kind of and so they're making it a thing you could use that's not just wild shape. It's a little bit larger. Wild shape is a way you use your channel nature. And the big part is it now uses a stat block that is a core stat block. And what exactly is on that stat block will sort of change as you level. But you're no longer going into the player's handbook appendix or into the monster manual or into every single book that's ever been published with a beast in it to find what your possible shapes are. And that has a lot of people angry because a lot of people, especially I think very invested people, love that level of granularity. But it's not just old people, experienced people, not old people. I've heard stories shared with me of new people who casual players who just love going through the monster manual and picking out creatures and stuff. Um, I personally think that while for sure some people like that, I like that. I think that's a real barrier to playing the class that you're supposed to go off and hunt down all of these things. I also think that it is disappointing to look at the list of creatures you can change into and realize that, stat block A and C are just optimal all the time. and so, you know, to choose another one is almost like a mathematical error. You have to decide to not be optimal because it's just so obvious that you should be this thing. And you see druid characters using the same forms over and over again. Um, so I like the idea of a common stat block. What I would like to do is customize it so that it really felt like a different creature and didn't feel boring. But I like it. I don't know. What do you think, Shawn?
I, despite like the last character I played being a druid, I am at the phase of my career, and I've said this 1,000 times, where I want to see a simpler game that you can do more with rather than a more complex game that you end up doing the same thing with. And I think with this druid, we are at the point of where we're at the same thing. What I would love to see, no one else is going to like this. What I would love to see is the druid becoming a subclass of the cleric, and the subclass features of the druid are all about wild shaping.
Hmm.
You can still play the druid, get the wild shape, but you don't have to add all of this other stuff to it to so you've got a full complement of spells just like a wizard would, but you can also do this wild shape, which is a
Yeah.
whole, now we're dedicating all this time and design energy and trying to figure out the best way to do it. And half the players are going to be mad regardless of what you do,
For
right?
sure.
If you allow any choice whatsoever, it becomes hard to use. I like the idea of having a, like you said, a stat block that's a little bit malleable to do different things
Mhm.
with. But you know, you're not going to make anyone happy because there are so many different ways to
Yeah.
play this. Uh, so, in that sense, I want to. I said this on the Lorecast last night, and I felt bad after I said it, and here I am saying it again. Right? I want to know what the point of all of this is. What's the point of all this redesign? And let's
Right.
figure out the best way to get to that point.
Well, I will say, to me, this is sort of the first time that I have seen the point.
Mhm.
I would argue that here in both the Druid and the Paladin, they've actually said, "Hey, these are actual design problems," right? Because,
Mhm.
like you're saying, wild shape, it inherently is problematic to say you are a full spellcaster, but also you can do this. And so it only barely works by the concept of, well, I'm going to shut down all your spellcasting while you do this other thing. And then problematically, oops, we forgot that this hit point thing will make you invincible or near invincible and be really unfair. Uh-oh. We better fix that in a revision, right? And but
Mhm.
it is a hard task to begin with, but it does need addressing, and I'm glad they see it. And the
Yeah.
paladin, as fun as it is to crit smite several times around, it's maybe not what the game needs balance wise and what the role of
Mhm.
the paladin really should be. And maybe the paladin should have way more flexibility than what everybody thinks they must do with their paladin, because obviously, you would never ever cast a spell because you must do this. Um, so I think they did. I mean, I think in this case, like if I
Mhm.
look at the cleric and the rogue, I think those are two classes that work really well. Why are you doing anything? With the
Mhm.
druid and the paladin, I say, yes, these for sure need some tweaks to their major appeal areas, right?
Mhm. Okay. Yeah, I can definitely see that, and I wish they had just said that. I wish they had said, with the druid and the paladin, we see these problems,
Hmm.
and this is how we're going to fix it. And at least that way, you know where to focus your
Your
rage, if
feedback or
that's
rage.
if that's your thing, but right,
Uh-huh.
your consideration,
Yeah.
instead of going all the way back to what is a druid really. Forget
Yeah.
rules, forget that. What's a druid, and what stories do we want the druid to flow forth from the
Yeah.
druid? And yeah.
And I agree with you that still, when it comes to the even the current version of wild shaping, you can't turn into a tiny creature, and you can't fly for until ninth level, and can't swim until seventh level. And these are really high levels of play for what we know most players do. And when I think of what is the concept of a druid, forget any mechanics or history of the game. I just think to myself, like, wild shape into like a raven and go look in the second story window, or turn into an insect and crawl into the door, or swim across the moat. And you're telling me I can't do these things, but I'm actually could have very low hit points. It could be quite fun and risky. And I think most players would like that kind of play. If I think of just random player that doesn't know anything and I just sit them at the table and I say, turn into something, that's the kind of utility and approach they'd want, rather than like just being a combat beast, right? Which is what the
Right.
game has been doing. And when you try to balance combat beast but you're also a spellcaster, you're only going to get but so good a combat beast. Now you're going to be disappointed in the druid. So
Mhm.
I hope those
Right.
masterclass videos and those design videos talk about things like this, because I think that would be good for fans to kind of hear. Like,
Yeah,
these
for
are
sure.
hard problems to solve, right? But
Right.
yeah,
Yeah. And also, we said go back, forget the rules, just what should this do? Then you say in your design, what does this game we are creating, call it whatever you want, 1D&D, 6e, 5.5, how do we expect it to be played? And how can we make it be what the players expect it
yeah,
to be, with staying balanced? The thing that you're talking about, right? The turning into an insect, can it be game breaking? Possibly. So how could it be game breaking? Well, if you stay like in bird form for 5 hours, you could fly this far. So make it a minute instead of
hmm
5 hours. Now you're giving that flexibility, but you've put a limit on it. So you can
yeah,
let them fly up to the window, look in, but they have to get out of there
yeah,
then, or they can crawl under the door, but then they have to crawl right back. And
right.
so you can make those sorts of design decisions to say at low levels, this is our expected power level and expected range of abilities. Play around with it in that way, to make it to conform to how you expect the play to be.
Yeah. Yeah, it's
So,
a it's an interesting task. I'm very curious because I think the feedback's going to be very negative, and this is one where I'm wondering, will they be able to, from the feedback, pull something that lets them move forward? I've said this many times. I loved how D&D Next would do a thing. We would hate aspects of it, or dislike, or love aspects of it, and then something totally different would show up. And then the last piece was an interesting, it fed off of the learnings that took
mhm,
place in all of those, right? It wasn't that they just
right.
said no to a thing or yes to a thing, but rather that all of that, they were able to gather the right data to, at the end, come up with a very good
Yeah.
5e. And I hope that's what happens here, rather than just, oh
I
well, let's go back to what we had. Or
I don't think it can happen, Teos. And the
yeah.
the, the problem is because we're just moving the furniture around the room,
Mm,
right? We're not bringing new furniture into the room. We're not changing the room. And so what worked for that was you could try these absolutely out
yeah,
there
it's true.
things and take the best of it. Here we're going from, instead of going from A to Z, we're going from Y to Z. And how much can
Yeah,
you do between Y and Z?
yeah,
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 there's
no, for sure.
always there's always the, well, that's how it is now. So why are you complaining about that? You've been playing with it for 10 years, right?
That's the other supremely interesting part that I heard. So they were talking about the paladin and how it may be slightly stronger in some ways, and they said, at high levels, and they're saying, but don't worry, because we're going to be making your monsters more powerful. And I go, wow, this point 0.5 edition, 5.5, it's getting, like, yes, compatible, but it's compatible the way the third edition and 3.5 were, which is to say that everybody ended up buying new books, right? And yet,
Yeah.
like, as you said, you're setting these constraints to where you can only change but so much, and yet everybody's going to end up with a new book, right?
Yeah.
Hmm.
So what did you think about the paladin? And is there anything you want to talk about more with the druid?
No, I think that's good. I mean, there are various interesting pieces, and you made a note. There are folks can look in our show notes if you're on our Patreon. There are a number of comments here that I thought were really good that you made. Um, I think the paladin, the big thing is divine smite, being once per turn. You cannot do it if you have cast a spell.
Mhm.
So that's really fascinating. But you get some other flexibilities. So it's sort of, slightly less powerful and more conditional. Um, I thought that was interesting. Some of there are some other tweaks that I thought were pretty decent. They tried to turn down some things like the aura of protection.
Mhm.
I don't know. What'd you think?
Yeah, I was fine with sort of limiting the smiting a bit. And uh the addition or subtraction, I should say, it sounds like you can smite at range now.
Yeah,
I
that's true.
that wasn't something you could do before, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, and you can do it unarmed, and you have more
Right.
flexibility about how.
So, for me, the paladin has always been this sort of strange, mild healer, strong buffer, smite, triggering, sort of all things. It
Mhm.
was probably one of the most powerful classes if you take into account the bonus to saving throws that it gives its allies, because
Mhm.
that +4 +5 is huge.
Yeah.
So to be able to smite constantly, especially against undead and fiends, to really bump that up, uh, I was fine with that getting taken down a level. Um,
Yeah, I think some of this could still. I mean, aura of protection to me is fundamentally problem
mm,
that is hard to mitigate. It's a it's just they have such big effects on the game, right? Those kinds of features, and it's in the idea that you have such a strong effect on the encounter design or how the encounter plays out on whether you have a particular class there or not is don't love it.
yeah, and I'd be fine with it working better at higher levels. They do give you an increased range at higher
Right.
levels, but I would almost be tempted to make it at lower levels. You can use a reaction to give someone a bonus,
Hmm.
or you can use one of your channel divinities to give someone a bonus to their armor class. That sort of thing, to make it more uh, event based rather than constant. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, for me, the paladin's always been just able to do too much and be too good at too much. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, Shawn, we have a lot of news. Do we want to try to hit a few other ones?
let's do
And
that.
and
Let's do that.
listeners, if you had other things that other thoughts about the Druid and the Paladin, let us know. I'm curious what folks think. Am I the
Yeah.
only one who loves the Druid? How do you feel about the Paladin? Let us know.
Yep. So the Avatar Legend starter box is being sold in Target. So this Kickstarter from Magpie Games got almost $10 million on Kickstarter. And apparently, when you get $10 million with your Kickstarter, without knowing how much you have to hand over to, the Last Airbender folks or whatever, apparently you can make a box set and get it in Target,
Awesome.
which to me is huge D&D news,
Yeah.
believe it or not,
Right.
because we want Wizards to do well, because we want more players in the game to give us more options, more products, more channels, more things that we can express our love of the game. And if a non D&D game can do that, even better.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, then you have
And
more ways that people could come into the whole hobby. That'd be great.
right now, I have not seen the Avatar Legends RPG. I have been told it's based on it's powered by the
Right.
Apocalypse sort of engine. If you had told me 3 years ago that in Target will be a box set for a game other than D&D, and it will be a powered by the Apocalypse engine game, I would have
Yeah.
said, yeah, right. Yeah, here we are. So
Here we
it it gives me hope. I hope it sells very well. And
Yeah.
not only does I hope it sells very well, I hope people pick it up and play it, uh, or at least try to play it, because even the people that backed it on Kickstarter, many of them had no idea what the game system was.
Right.
They didn't even
It's just the
think about
concept,
it.
right? Just the enjoyment of the
Exactly.
property. Yeah.
So I was pleased to hear that, and I hope it does well. Any thoughts on that?
No, no, I think you're spot on with that. I think this next piece I thought made me laugh. So WizKids has made another of their life-sized figures, and it's a mimic, which is funny because of course they failed at making it not look like a mimic. It because it doesn't articulate anything. It's just a thing. and it is the chest with the mouth, tongue kind of coming out and the teeth and stuff. So for $375, you get this chest with fangs and a huge tongue. It does look really cool,
Mhm.
if you can spend $375 on it. But I thought that was sort of funny that, the whole idea of a mimic is sort of the way that it surprises you, and this does not surprise you, but it looks
This
cool.
that it does not. Well, I'll tell you what, Tails. I will sell you something for $300. I swear to you, it's a mimic. It might not ever show itself, but trust me, it is a mimic.
I mean, I could just see them going through the discussion of it. And they're like, no,
This
it can't
this
just look like a
bowl,
chest. It's a
this
mimic.
bowl, it's a mimic. $300. Trust me.
It's made of platinum. It's a spell component. Tell Mike Shawn.
Exactly. So that's yeah, that's great. And speaking of monsters, the D&D movie trailer is highlighting some of the monsters from the movie. It includes actors talking through the creatures from the movie, owl bears, intellect devourers, displacer beasts, some new footage that we haven't seen yet, a few new jokes. What did you think of that?
I thought it was, first of all, like I'm really glad that the actors are engaged like this, right? To have every single one of the actors spend the time, uh, on YouTube like this is great. Like this is the kind of thing you want for this. And they take turns talking about the various monsters. And one of the ones I liked is they shared some new footage of intellect devourers underground. They look really cool in the scene, kind of all moving around with their brain and four legs kind of thing. And this comment is made, one of the characters sharing lore, that they are attracted to high intelligences. And so these intellect hours just walk right by them as they're like standing still. And they're like, well, that's insulting. It's just, I'm like, okay, if this movie has things like this, I'm gonna have a good time. Like this could be really
Yep.
enjoyable. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful,
The
Shawn.
more, yep, the more I see, I try not to let my expectations get too high. And so I'm trying not to watch some of these things, but we report on them, so I do. And I'm like, okay, it's still going to be just an average movie. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. I don't, but I'm looking more and more forward to it. So end of the month, we will be there. We will be ready to rock and roll on the D&D movie. What else is going on? Well, Magic the Gathering has achieved what D&D just could not achieve up to this point. And what is that, Teos?
Branded things in a freezer case, Shawn, which is,
Yeah.
as we know, the goal of all things.
It is. We joked, seriously joked about in Spain the D&D branded sandwich meat, the bologna,
Mm-hmm.
and now we are moving closer to that goal with the Magic the Gathering branded hot pockets.
Yeah, I mean, branded lunch meats is that high bar that any edition of D&D can aspire to. We know that it's nigh untouchable. We came close with the branded nerds candy, and Magic the
Mhm.
Gathering just said, "Step aside, D&D," and spotted in the freezer aisle of grocery stores was Italian style meatballs and mozzarella hot pockets branded with
Mhm.
Magic the Gathering and featuring a character on it and things. And I wish I'd seen this earlier so that I could ask Kyle Brink about this important question.
Yeah.
Of,
When are we
of
getting when are we getting
yeah,
our D&D Funyuns? I think is
yeah.
really
There's some
the
times I
big
wake up,
question
why
at
didn't
that
I
time.
ask Kyle about, and this is the one that's
Yeah.
really at the top of the list. Why didn't I press him hard? And I mean really hard on the
Yeah.
branded lunch meat issue. So if I ever
It
get the
was your Frost.
opportunity,
It was your Frost Nixon moment and you blew it. All right. So, yes, last bit of news. The cool name RPG, a community owned RPG, is kickstarting trying. You want to talk about this?
yeah, I mean, I thought this was really fascinating. It's both sign of the time. Well, it's a sign of the times in several different ways. And I just looked at this crowdfunding for a yet to be named RPG, and the concept is: all right, we're going to have a role playing game. We are going to build it. It's not built yet, but it will include a perpetual, irrevocable, royalty free license for creators. Gee, where did we get that language from? Uh, so
Mhm.
it clearly feeds off of the OGL, and that alone might not have made me pay attention to it. But the list of creators is amazing. Like Crystal Mazur, Owen Stevens, Matt Forbeck, Kenneth Haidt, Robin Laws, and it just goes on. Some really fantastic designers. There, I think 10 of them named so far. But it's raised 14,000, getting close to 15,000 with 10 days to go at the time of this recording. And I just kind of think like, wow, like that is not a lot of money with which to create an RPG, let alone pay off these amazing folks. And it's a shame because I would love to see those folks create a RPG, but maybe it's the way this was positioned. What do you think, Shawn?
Yeah, I don't know what you're supposed to do with it. Yeah, I like the idea, but if I want my game, I'm going to make my game. And so I could see going to publishers
Mm.
and saying, "Hey, would you help us fund this?" But with 246 backers, I don't know what was hoped for, especially if it's just open content and when it's all done, I can just go and use it anyway.
Yeah.
I'm sort of
And
confused by what the goal was. And maybe the
maybe,
goal
yeah.
was just to make it.
Yeah, and maybe the thought was I can get a great RPG from these folks, and because it's open gaming license, people will back it. But maybe that was before the days when Wizards said, you know what, we're backing off of this problem.
Yeah.
It's yeah, it's a tough one. I'd love to see these folks make an RPG, but I want them to have more than this in pay, let alone what it takes to make a book. The other thing is that the
Right.
plan here is that this would eventually be free to everybody. So if you're going to make
Mhm.
this free, you need your money up front to cover all the costs. And
Yeah.
they've made their funding goal, but I suspect they really need a much higher. I mean, not suspect. I know that it takes more than this amount to make this book properly. So we'll see.
Yeah. When I saw this, I was like, "Ooh, this is really exciting." And I went and looked and went, "Oh, that does not many people are sharing my excitement with the cast of characters here who are going to be making this game." And I've seen a lot recently of people who had full-time jobs in the industry saying, "I'm free for freelancing now." Um, you know, the Zweihander uh,
Yeah.
publisher,
McNeil.
I can't pronounce it, McNeil, shutting down, other places shrinking. And I'm wondering if this is just a stage and this huge increase in support and
Mm.
gameplay of role-playing games is slowing down for good, if it's slowing down temporarily, if we even really ever had an increase, or if it was just sort of social media awareness making it look like there was an increase. I mean, obviously with D&D, we saw the
Sure.
sales going up and up, but I don't know.
So I think, well, if we accept that people coming into D&D will always mean people coming into other games, which I think is probably true, right? I mean, at least so
Mhm.
far, almost anybody of consequence will tell you rising tide, all boats are lifted. Disproportionately lifts D&D, but all
Right.
other RPGs, because you have what happened to most of us. We start with D&D, then we go, what's that other game? And suddenly we're playing Shadowrun and we're playing Call of Cthulhu and Paranoia and all these other things because, of course. So I think that it is a reality that it is a rising tide. It does lift all boats, but there are so many factors like the pandemic. How much of it was the pandemic, or how much of it
Mhm.
was a reaction to kids not being able to get together and people not being able to get together? I don't, I heard a lot of, because of the demographic of my kids, right? A lot of people that were in middle school and high school ages uh, into it, starting up groups, a lot of energy and excitement, and a lot of parents going, "Yes, please get my kid physically in a place talking to other people and not on their
Mhm.
phone." And
Right.
unfortunately, what D&D is saying is, let's get them all on a VTT, right? I mean, not exclusively, but right.
Yeah.
And so I
Right.
don't know, I don't know what's going to happen post pandemic and what the sales are going to be like. And it's a good question. You might be right. Maybe this will be a big inflection point. A lot of it may hinge on how good one D&D is and whether it confuses people. You know, the
Mhm.
period, the end of
Yeah.
4E was super confusing. If you walked into a store, you would see just a mess of books on a shelf. And I remember trying to pretend I was a new person. And I think I would have just walked away rather than buy something because there was no clarity as to what you should buy, how, why, right? And fifth
Mhm.
edition could have, you know, if you look at a store, you can argue that if you walk into many stores today, gaming stores, and you see all of these books, you just don't really know what you should walk away with,
Yeah.
even with a
Yeah.
few starter sets.
It's yeah, and this is something that happens at the end of edition often.
Mhm.
And but yeah, are we at the end of an edition? That we don't even know
Right,
if we are.
right.
So we don't know what is coming next. We can't. You can never predict anything with 100% surety.
Will someone
But
buy the 5.5 player's handbook and the 5e DMG and then go home and go,
right,
oh, you know, we have no idea, right? It's going to be fascinating
right,
to see how that plays. And does
or
that,
one of the four starter sets that are out that we
uh-huh,
don't know which came after which.
right?
Is this for? You know, it's tough.
Yeah,
It's tough.
yeah, fascinating. So we'll see.